The Wyoming winter had teeth that year, biting through even the thickest coat. Ethan Wade stood on his porch, cupping his hands around his mouth and calling until his voice went hoarse. "Rusty, here, boy. Rusty." Nothing but wind answered him, howling across the empty plains like a chorus of ghosts. The dog had been gone for 3 days now. 3 days since Rusty had bolted during the storm, spooked by lightning that struck too close to the barn. Ethan had searched until darkness and cold drove him back, then started again at first light. He'd ridden to every neighboring ranch within 10 miles, checked every gully and canyon, followed every track that might have been the red-brown shepherd's distinctive paw prints. Nothing. Ethan trudged back inside, the cabin feeling cavernous in its silence. He'd gotten Rusty 2 years ago, right after Martha's funeral, when the loneliness had gotten so thick he could barely breathe through it. The dog had been a pup then, all ears and paws and boundless energy. He'd filled the silence with barking and tail wagging, and the kind of unconditional devotion that had kept Ethan from eating his gun during those first dark months. Now even that was gone. He slumped into Martha's old rocking chair. He still thought of it as hers, even after 5 years, and stared at the empty space by the hearth where Rusty always slept. The whiskey bottle on the shelf called to him, promising numbness. But Ethan ignored it. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Grief couldn't be drowned, it just learned to swim. At 42, Ethan felt ancient. The ranch ran itself mostly, his few cattle hardy enough to survive without much fussing, his horses smart enough to find shelter when they needed it. He went through the motions, feeding, mending, surviving, but he'd stopped living somewhere around the time they'd lowered Martha into the frozen ground. That night, he barely slept, jerking awake at every creak and groan of the cabin, hoping to hear Rusty's familiar scratch at the door. Dawn came gray and bitter. Ethan was pulling on his boots, preparing for another fruitless search, when he heard it. A bark. Faint, distant, but unmistakably Rusty's deep woof. He burst through the door so fast he nearly fell down the porch steps. There, cresting the ridge about 100 yards out, was Rusty, his red coat matted with burrs and mud, but tail wagging like a flag in a windstorm. "Rusty, you ornery mutt." Ethan felt his throat tighten with relief. "Where the hell have you been?" But Rusty didn't come running like usual. Instead, he barked again, insistent, then turned and headed back the way he'd come. After a few steps, he stopped and looked back, barking once more. Ethan knew that bark. It was Rusty's "follow me" bark, the one he used when he'd found a calf stuck in brush or spotted a coyote near the hen house. Something in Ethan's gut twisted. He grabbed his rifle from inside, old habits from his army days, and followed the dog into the white wilderness. Rusty led him along the ridge, then down into a ravine Ethan rarely visited, too rocky and treacherous for cattle. That's when he saw her, a figure collapsed in the snow, nearly buried by fresh powder. Dark hair spilling across white ground, buckskin clothing. Apache, his mind registered automatically. And from the stillness of her form, possibly dead. Rusty whined and pawed at the snow near her head. Ethan dropped to his knees beside her, pressing fingers to her neck. A pulse, faint but there. "Jesus," he breathed. "How long have you been out here?" Getting the woman back to the cabin nearly killed them both. She was dead weight, unconscious and half frozen, and the snow had started falling again, thick and fast. Ethan hoisted her over his shoulder. She was lighter than he expected. Too light, probably hadn't eaten properly in days, and trudged back the way they'd come, following Rusty, who seemed to understand the urgency. By the time he kicked open his cabin door, Ethan's muscles screamed and his lungs burned from the cold. He laid her on his bed, the only bed, and started working with the practiced efficiency of someone who dealt with frostbite before. He'd been a field medic during his army years before he'd bought this ranch and tried to build a life far from war and death. Her fingers and toes were dangerously cold, her lips blue. He stripped off her wet buckskin dress without ceremony. Modesty had no place when death was knocking, and wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then placed heated stones from the fire near her extremities. Not too close, not too hot. That would cause more damage. Rusty settled beside the bed, resting his head on the mattress, his eyes fixed on the woman's face. "You found her, did you, boy?" Ethan murmured, checking her pulse again. Stronger now, but she wasn't out of danger. Where was she going, I wonder? And why? He made broth from dried beef and got a few spoonfuls between her lips, her swallowing reflex kicking in automatically. That was a good sign. He changed the heated stones, monitored her breathing, and waited. She woke near midnight, her eyes flying open with wild panic. She tried to bolt upright, but weakness sent her crashing back down. Her hand shot out, grasping for something. A weapon, probably. That wasn't there. "Easy," Ethan said from his chair by the fire. "You're safe. You were dying in the snow. My dog found you." She turned her head toward him, dark eyes assessing, calculating threat levels. When she spoke, her English was clear but accented. "Where are my clothes?" Drying by the fire, they were soaked through. Ethan kept his voice calm, his hands visible. "You have frostbite on your toes. Not serious yet, but you need rest and warmth." "I must go." She tried to sit up again, and this time managed it, though she swayed dangerously. The blanket slipped, and she clutched it to her chest. "My people. Ain't gonna do your people much good if you're dead." Ethan stood slowly, moving to pour hot broth. "Drink this first. Then you can tell me where you need to go, and I'll help you get there when the storm clears." She eyed him suspiciously but accepted the cup, wrapping her hands around it like it was precious metal. She sipped cautiously, and he saw the exact moment the warmth hit her system, saw her shoulders loosen slightly. "I am Dakota," she said finally. "My husband died in the autumn. Soldiers. They said he stole a horse that was already his. They hanged him from a tree like—" Her voice broke. "Like he was nothing." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough army justice to know how that story usually went. "I'm sorry." "Your people are not sorry." Dakota's eyes flashed. "They take and take. Land, lives, children. Now they take widows too. Say we must go to reservation, live in their boxes, eat their flour that makes us sick. I will not go. I was traveling north to my sister's people in Montana. Then the storm came." "You were going alone? On foot?" Ethan couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "I had a horse. It broke its leg in the ravine. I had to—" She mimed, shooting. "Then I walked. Then I fell. Then darkness." She looked at Rusty, who had moved closer to her, tail wagging hopefully. "Then your dog." As if understanding, Rusty placed his head in her lap. Dakota's hand came down automatically to stroke his fur, and something in her face softened. "He is loyal. He stayed with me until his strength came back, kept me warm with his body. Then he went for you." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Rusty had stayed with her. For how long? A day? 2? The dog had nearly frozen himself to save a stranger. The storm lasted 5 days, pinning them in the cabin together. Ethan gave Dakota the bed and made himself a pallet by the fire. They moved around each other carefully at first, 2 wounded creatures wary of further pain. But slowly, in the way of people trapped together by circumstance and necessity, they began to talk. Dakota told him about her husband, a gentleman who loved horses and told stories that made children laugh. About her life before the reservations, when her people moved freely with the seasons. About the daughter she'd lost to fever 3 winters past. a grief that echoed Ethan's own losses until their sorrows seemed to harmonize. Ethan told her about Martha, about the baby that had come too early and taken Martha with it, about the ranch that was supposed to be their dream but had become his prison, about the loneliness that had nearly consumed him until a red dog had given him something to care for again. "You understand loss," Dakota said on the third night, watching him carve a new handle for his axe. "It lives in your eyes." "Reckon we both do." Ethan glanced up. "Seems loss is about the only thing life guarantees, besides death and taxes." She almost smiled at that. "Your people have a saying, misery loves company. Perhaps there is truth in it." "Maybe it ain't about the misery." Ethan set down his carving. "Maybe it's about knowing someone else survived it too. Makes it feel less like you're crazy for still being here." Dakota looked at him for a long moment, and something passed between them. Recognition. Understanding. The beginning of something neither of them had expected or perhaps wanted. On the fifth day, the storm broke. Sunshine poured through the windows like a blessing, and the world outside glittered white and new. Ethan stood on the porch, Rusty at his side, and knew he should help Dakota prepare to leave. Montana was still weeks of travel north, and she'd need supplies, maybe a horse if he could spare one. But the thought of watching her walk away made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since losing Martha. Dakota emerged from the cabin, dressed in her repaired buckskin, a pack on her back. She'd gained back some weight, some color. She looked stronger. She looked beautiful. "I should go," she said, but her feet didn't move toward her horse. "You could stay," Ethan blurted out, then felt heat rise in his face. "I mean, just until spring. The trail north is still dangerous, and you're not fully recovered. I could use help around the ranch, and Lord knows Rusty's taken a shine to you." As if on cue, Rusty trotted over to Dakota, leaning against her legs. She looked down at the dog, then back at Ethan. "Why would you do this? Risk trouble with your neighbors, with authorities. They will not like Apache woman living here." "Let them not like it." Ethan stepped closer. "I've spent 5 years barely living, just existing. These 5 days having someone to talk to share meals with. It reminded me what it feels like to be alive. If you want to go north, I understand. But if you want to stay, even for a while, you're welcome here." Dakota studied his face, searching for deception, and finding only hope and loneliness that mirrored her own. "Your wife would want me to live again, would want this house filled with something besides ghosts and regrets." Ethan's voice softened. "And maybe you deserve a place to heal too, Dakota. A place where you're not just surviving, but living." She was quiet for so long, Ethan thought he'd ruined everything. Then she set down her pack. "Until spring," she said. "We will see if a lonely cowboy and a lost widow can share the same space without killing each other." Ethan grinned. "Reckon we'll manage." Spring came and went, and Dakota stayed. The neighbors talked, some with hostility, others with grudging acceptance. But in that cabin on the Wyoming plains, 2 broken people found something unexpected. Not just healing, but a second chance at love. Rusty, the dog who'd brought them together, slept each night stretched across both their feet, content in his role as the most successful matchmaker in the territory.